So now let's talk about the evolution of fungi as they colonized land. Some scientists think that fungi may have colonized land before plants, and fossils of early fungi and early plants are found on Earth around the same time, so it's somewhat difficult to determine which one got there first. Okay, the fossils from this period, greater than 470 million years old, are also not really that abundant. Okay, so it makes it kind of difficult to figure this question out. But one reason that some scientists think that the fungi may have arrived first is that many fungi are known to form symbiotic or mutually beneficial relationships with land plants. And they think that it may have been easier for the first land plants to be able to survive the challenges of living on land if fungi were already there to form these relationships and help the plants to become established. Okay, the ecological role of fungi is going to be very important in this discussion. Okay, unlike plants, fungi are heterotrophs. So they have to obtain their nutrients from outside of their body. Okay, they don't manufacture any of their own food through chemical reactions, the way that plants do using photosynthesis. Actually digest or break down their food before they absorb it into their cells. Okay, so this is sort of the opposite of the way that animals consume food. Okay, both fungi and animals are heterotrophs, but animals consume their food first, and then there are digestive enzymes that break up complex molecules into simple ones that can be easily digested. So an example of this would be a human being's body breaking down a complex carbohydrate into simple sugars that are ready to be absorbed into the bloodstream and quickly used by the body. Okay, so instead, the fungi secrete these enzymes outside of their cells onto the substance that they're going to consume, break it down into easily absorbable pieces, and then those smaller molecules enter the cells in a form that is more easily usable by the fungi. So as you might expect, fungal cells have a number of adaptations that facilitate the way in which they obtain nutrition. All fungal cells have cell walls. Okay, that's something they have in common with plants, but not with animals that lack cell walls. But the cell wall of a fungus is very different than the cell wall of a plant. It's composed of a different type of polysaccharide. Okay, the cell wall of plants is composed of cellulose, a polysaccharide that contains primarily carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Okay, but the cell wall of a fungus is composed of chitin. Okay, this is a very strong but very flexible polysaccharide that also contains the element nitrogen. Now you may be familiar with chitin already. It's the same substance that forms the exoskeleton of insects. So keep in mind that the exoskeleton is a layer that covers the entire insect, while a cell wall covers the individual cells. But if you've ever found an insect that's recently shed its skin and left the skin behind, for example, a cicada leaves its skin behind on trees, and you've ever picked that up, you can see that it's a kind of tough and crunchy material. Okay, it's rigid enough to prevent the cell from bursting if too much water enters by osmosis. Okay, the cell wall of a fungus has to be porous enough or have large enough holes for water and nutrients to easily enter the cell. Okay, if a fungus is in an environment that's too wet and it doesn't have enough dissolved solids in the water, then too much water flows into the cell and it makes it very rigid. If that chitin were not there, the cell could actually burst. So the structure of fungi is very variable. Okay, some fungi are unicellular. An example of this is yeast. The same yeast that's used to make bread is a fungus, and it's a single cell. Other fungi grow as long strings called filaments. Okay, filaments are a name for a long string of single cells that are joined together. And the type of filaments found in fungi are called hyphae. Okay, hypha is the singular, hypha with an E at the end is the plural. And some of these fungal hyphae have extensions on the cells that are able to hook inside the cells of other organisms. And this allows parasitic fungi to extract nutrients out of the host organism. Okay, and as we'll see in a moment, it can also help to share nutrients with plants that the fungus has a mutually beneficial relationship with. Okay, so we can see these hyphae inside this mushroom. Okay, there's a lot of network of different hyphae crossing over each other to form the mushroom. And if you've wondered how a mushroom can kind of suddenly appear out of nowhere overnight, it's because there are also a lot of these hyphae underground, and the mushroom is just the extension of these hyphae coming up out of the ground to produce this mushroom, which contains spores and facilitates the reproduction of the fungus. Okay, when these hyphae form a branching network underground, that network of many crossing over hyphae is known as the mycelium. Okay, the plural of mycelium is mycelia. So the fact that mycelium is composed of many long, stringy, narrow pieces means that there's lots of surface area for absorption. There's a lot of outer surface of the cells that's exposed to the soil or to whatever else the fungus is growing on. As you probably know, a lot of fungi live on the trunks of trees or on dead and decaying wood, or they cover the body of a dead organism in order to extract the nutrients. Okay, I previously mentioned how fungi and plants have this mutually beneficial relationship, okay, also known as a symbiosis. The types of fungi that form these relationships are known as mycorrhizae. Okay, and we can see the mycorrhizae here. This is a plant whose roots are shown in this off-white here. And the more grayish-white material here are the mycorrhizal fungi. And in this case, they look like kind of an extension of the roots, allowing the roots to penetrate the soil deeper for absorbing nutrients and water. Okay, and there are two different types of structures of mycorrhizae. I don't really expect you to remember the names of these two different types, but you should just be aware that the mycorrhizae can arrange themselves in two different ways around the root of the fungus. Okay, one type is the ectomycorrhizal fungi. These form sort of a covering that wraps around a root and occasionally penetrates into the root as well for ease of transferring the nutrients. The other type, the arbuscular mycorrhizae, have the actual hyphae rather than just an extension of the hyphae growing through the cell walls of the root and into little indentations in the root membrane. Okay, so the way that the hyphae in mycorrhizae exchange nutrients with the plants is very similar to the ways in which parasitic fungi can hook into the cells of their host and suck nutrients out of the unwilling host. And these extensions of the fungal cells within the hyphae that extend into the plant are called haustoria. Okay, again, that's the plural form of haustorium. Okay, so these little branching extensions that look kind of like a hand allow the plant and the fungus to trade nutrients back and forth. Okay, so the sugars that are easily produced by the plant can be given to the fungus, and any soil nutrients or water that might be scarce to the plant during a drought can be transferred from the fungus to the plant. So in effect, each species is trading the resource that it has more of for something that it needs more of. Okay, and there are other advantages to the fungus as well. It's a lot easier for the fungus to stay anchored within the soil if that plant is protecting it. Okay, soil that's covered by plants is a lot less prone to erosion by wind or water or disturbance by animals that are walking along that surface. Okay, so there's some structural benefit as well. Okay, so now let's look at the life cycle of a fungus. Fungi can reproduce either sexually or asexually. Okay, they have the ability to trade off depending upon the environment and their needs at the time. Okay, let's review for a moment. What's the advantage of sexual reproduction over asexual reproduction? Okay, so you should have said that sexual reproduction increases genetic diversity. So that gives the parent a better chance that some of their offspring will be well adapted to the environment if the environment changes. Okay, so let's start in the center of this diagram, illustrating the life cycle. We'll start with the mycelium. Okay, remember that's the network of the hyphae that's either found underground or covering the substrate upon which a fungus grows. Okay, it's very simple for the mycelium to undergo asexual reproduction. Okay, the mycelium is haploid, so it only needs to undergo mitosis to produce spores, and these spore-producing structures grow around the spores. They are usually stalks that come up outside of the hyphae, and they assist the spores in dispersal. Okay, the spores can blow away and find a new place to colonize. Okay, and then those spores land on an appropriate substance, and then they undergo more mitosis, shown here by germination. That's also when they're taking hold on the new surface. Okay, germination occurs when those spores attach themselves to an appropriate substrate and then undergo more mitosis to produce longer hyphae and another mycelium network. Okay, very simple. But sexual recombination between different fungal individuals can occur through sexual reproduction. Okay, so fungi don't actually have males and females. Instead, they have different types of cells that are known as plus and minus. And that's because males and females are defined as individuals. Females are individuals that produce an egg cell. An egg cell is a larger cell with a lot of cytoplasm. And it's generally the cell that stays in one place and waits to be fertilized. Males are individuals that produce sperm. Okay, sperm don't have very much cytoplasm. They're generally a nucleus with a coating, and then a flagellum, which is involved in the motion of the cell. Okay, and the sperm travels to the egg and fertilization occurs. Since fungi don't have egg and sperm, we can't classify them as male or female, but they do have different mating types that we call plus and minus. Okay, and only a plus and a minus can undergo sexual reproduction with one another. Can't have two minuses or two pluses. Okay, so in sexual reproduction, we have two haploid individuals that are plus and minus that have to come together. Okay, the cells from two different mycelia actually merge together. Okay, and this process is called plasmogamy. Okay, and it's a little bit different from fertilization. Eventually, a zygote is formed from these two cells. But instead of fertilization occurring immediately, it basically happens in two steps. Okay, these two cells merge through plasmogamy, and you can remember this term because the cytoplasm of both cells is coming together, and a single cell wall is going to form, making the structure an individual single cell. Okay, but the two nuclei don't fuse. The DNA are contained separate in separate nuclei. And this stage, which is called a heterokaryotic stage, okay, as opposed to a diploid individual, in which two copies of every chromosome are present in the same nucleus, or a haploid individual, in which one copy of a chromosome is present in that nucleus, there are two haploid nuclei contained in the same cell. And the fungus can go a long time in this state, this heterokaryotic state. Sometimes that state lasts for weeks or months or even years. okay, depending upon the environment. When the environment triggers a need for genetic variation, the fusion of the two nuclei occurs, and that forms a diploid zygote. Okay, and the fusion of the two nuclei, which is sort of like the second half of fertilization, is called karyogamy. Okay, the zygote, or the diploid stage, doesn't stay around for long. Okay, as soon as that nucleus is formed, it triggers the process of meiosis, which produces different types of haploid spores. And then those spores can then be dispersed to a new substrate. Then they can take hold and germinate and grow into a new mycelium. And then, of course, this life cycle, which looks kind of like a figure 8, can stay on the asexual path, switch to the sexual path, or stay on the sexual path for a while. It's very flexible. Okay, so keep in mind that the spores produced by asexual reproduction are identical, whereas the spores produced by meiosis are all different, since they contain a different subset of the two parents' genes. Okay, there are also a number of fungi that can only reproduce through asexual reproduction. Okay, these include certain types of molds and the single-celled fungus, the yeast. Okay, since these are single-celled organisms, they can reproduce in a fairly simple way. But instead of splitting down the center the way that a prokaryotic cell would divide in half, or the way that a multicellular organism's cells would undergo mitosis, the budding is a little bit different. Okay, it's sort of like a smaller loop that fills up with cytoplasm and eventually grows to the size of the original cell. Okay, so it's sort of like the parent cell is filling up a balloon, okay, that starts out small. And this process is called budding, okay, instead of cell division, because it's more accurate to describe a small growing thing as a bud rather than division, which assumes an equal amount of material being divided in half.